Dry Hollow, Colorado Territory. Winter 1882. The wind howled like a widow's weeping through every ravine and gully, carrying the scent of falling snow and burning pine tar. On the frozen dirt road, the wagon grunted like a dying animal, its wheels grinding into the frozen mud, lurching as it lurched into town. No one turned around, no welcoming glances. Here, carriages came like birds in a net, usually bringing trouble, not hope. But today was different. The car door opened with a cold screech. Clara May stepped out, white steam rising from her chapped lip, her eyes scanning the main street as if searching for signs of a life lost or a battle to come. The dark blue dress was too tight, as if it had never been made for a real body. The neckline was torn, the bodice stretched tight over her full breasts, the seams showing at her hips. The skirt was stained with dust and dried blood, evidence of the long journey from Philadelphia. The wind tore her hair, and her cheeks were flushed not just with cold, but with anger, a simmering anger she had been harboring for miles. Clara is not a delicate oriental flower. She is a map of resistance. Every curve of her body is a slap in the face of stereotypes. Every step, a silent declaration against being viewed through a superficial lens. Her boots clicked on the hard ice as she stepped out, clutching a carpet bag with nothing but a few old clothes and her pride. Ahead stood Amos Beard, the only son of the banker who had written her an invitation, in suede gloves and eyes as cold as the winter here. He looked at her not into her eyes, but as if weighing flesh. His lips pressed together, his jaw as taut as a bowstring. "Miss Clara," he said, his voice as hard as rusty steel. It's not what I thought." His words cut like a knife cold, quick and needless. He wanted a woman who was demure and slender, not a woman who looked men straight in the eye and unblinking. Clara didn't answer. She just lowered her bag to the ground and stood tall, chin held high, as if he were the one being judged. Her eyes drifted over the widow sweeping the porch, the eyes peering from behind the curtains. "I came halfway across America to get here," she said, her voice low, each word distinct, like the sound of wheels rolling through quicksand. "You promised." Amos didn't reply. He just turned and walked away, as if Clara were a misdirected package. The wind blew hard. Clara stood alone. This town, with its decaying facade and cold eyes, was swallowing her up in the dust. But from across the street, someone was watching. Jeb Harlond, a man who lived on the north edge of the valley, stood against the door of an abandoned blacksmith shop. His cloak reached to his knees. Dust covered his shoulders. His eyes were as gray as forged steel, and an old wound dragged his legs slightly, a relic of a war he would never talk about. He saw it all, her wounded eyes, her proud, unyielding stance, and the way the entire town cowered before a woman who dared to exist. Jeb was not a man to gossip, but his eyes knew. The woman had not come here looking for a home. She had come here looking for a last chance at life. He stepped out of the shadows. His boots clicked heavily on the hard ground. Dust flew up with each step. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "I have a place," he said, his voice as hoarse as an old door creaking. "It's not big, it's not pretty, but it's comfortable if you need. Follow me?" Clara asked no more questions. She just nodded, a nod full of weariness, of crushed pride, and followed the man with the sad eyes of the mountains. She didn't know that night would be unlike any other, not because of the cold wind, not because of the fire in the old stove, but because in that cabin, under the rotten wood roof, between two lost souls, something would begin to burn. Jeb Harland's wagon creaked on the icy trail, the mule's breath steaming in the dying light. Clara May sat beside him, her handbag tucked between her boots. His borrowed dust jacket swallowed her figure. It smelled of pine smoke and leather. A faint trace of him, she pulled it tighter, her curves softening under its weight, but the wind still whistled through the seams. Neither of them said anything. The silence wasn't heavy. It was simply there, like snow covering the pine trees. Clara glanced at Jeb, his broad hands steady on the rein, his blue-gray eyes tracking the horizon. His beard was thick, his hat pulled low, but she noticed the way he shifted, prioritizing his injured leg. A man accustomed to pain, she thought, and wondered what else he carried. Dusk falls. The small house appears. A low, sturdy hut stood at the edge of a clearing, smoke curling from its chimney. It wasn't much a patched roof, a small barn, a pile of firewood under a tarp, but it felt like a world apart, away from the judgmental eyes of Dry Hollow. Jeb helped her down, his hands gripping hers tightly, calloused but not holding back. Inside, the air was warm, the stove giving off a dim light. A single bed was in the corner of the room, a neatly folded wool blanket. A rifle leaned against the door. Everything is simple, you said, but empty of softness. Clara hung her dust jacket on a hanger, her torn dress catching the firelight, the neckline falling down to reveal part of her collarbone. She pulled it up, her cheeks burning. But Jeb didn't look. He was at the stove, pulling out a pot. "You can help," he said, his voice low as if it hadn't been used in a long time. She nodded, stepping beside him, her shoulder brushing his as she reached for the knife. They worked in silence. Beans, potato, a simple stew. Her soft hands from city life, initially clumsy, but she learned very quickly when she cut her thumb. He handed her a rag without saying a word. They ate in silence, spoons scraping against the tin. Her posture was straight, refusing to appear small. He offered her the bed, but she insisted on sleeping on the floor next to the stove. He didn't argue, just sat down on the chair, his injured legs stretched out. The fire crackles. The wind howls outside. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," he said, then paused. "Why did you bring me here?" He shrugged. "You need a place." Her name came next, Clara. His name, Jeb. That was enough for now. The morning was cold and the sky was gray. Clara woke up with coffee and oatmeal. Jeb was out. She wore his canvas pants and flannel shirt, too big but warm. The cloth rubbed against her skin as she stepped out into the snow. Her breath caught in the cold, but she followed him to the stables. He handed her a pitchfork. "Cage," he said. She nodded, her hands blistering rapidly, but her steps were steady. "They work all day long. Hay, fences, feed bags." Jeb didn't compliment her, but he didn't correct her either. She kept the gait, passed the nail, and caught up. By midday, they sat outside the barn, sharing dried meat from a cloth bag. Her hair was loose, strands clinging to her sweaty neck. The flannel shirt hugged her curves as she bent down to get the water. Jeb's eyes glanced over it just once, then left. She noticed but said nothing. The silence changed, no longer empty. The days passed in this rhythm. Work, food, firelight. Clara's hands were more calloused, her movements more certain. She was no longer startled by the howling of wolves in the night. Jeb's limp got worse in the cold, but he never complained. She watched him, learning the weight of his losses, a brother to fever, a wife to childbirth, a leg to war. He didn't talk about it, but the little house contained their ghosts. A second bed folded away, a scuff mark on the porch railing. Clara didn't ask and he didn't tell. But when she stirred the stew and he mended his shoes, their elbows touched, and neither of them pulled back. She caught him looking at her once as she bent down to scoop water from the stream. Her shirt pulled tight over her chest, a bead of sweat running down her throat. His jaw clenched, but he returned to his work. Something unspoken is simmering, fragile but growing. One night, the air felt different, warmer, heavier. Small fire, casting shadow on small house. Clara sat on the bed, brushing her hair, soft waves falling over her shoulders. Her nightgown was thin, clinging to her skin in the heat, the fabric accentuating the soft curve of her hips. Jeb was nearby, adjusting the reins, his hands steady, but his eyes flicking to her. She felt it, the weight of his gaze, not like Amos's cold judgment, but something deep, more yearning. She stood up and moved to the stove to stir the embers, her movement slow and deliberate. The nightgown fell down to reveal one shoulder. She did not correct it. Jeb set the reins down, his chair creaking as he stood. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel his warmth. Her breath caught. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse and low. She turned back. Her eyes met his. Her lips parted. His fingers lightly brushed her wrists. A shiver ran down her body. She stepped closer, her chest touching his, the distance between them disappearing. His hand slid down to her waist, firmly, gently pulling her closer. Her fingers ran along the edge of his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin underneath. Their breaths mingled, her lips hovering near his, the air thick with desire. Her hand slid inside his shirt, touching something small and cold, a necklace hidden against his chest. It opened in her fingers, revealing an old, faded photograph of a woman, her face soft, haunted. Jeb froze, his breath catching, his eyes dark with a pain older than Clara. She pulled back, the necklace dangling between them, the moment shattered by the ghost of his past. He stepped back, jaw clenched, putting the necklace away without a word. Clara's heart was pounding, her body still trembling with unsatisfied desire. But the weight of his silence weighed heavily on her. She lay down, staring at the ceiling, the firelight fading. Who is she? And what influence does she still have over the man who saved her? The necklace lingered in Clara's mind, its weight heavier than the cold mornings that followed. She didn't ask about the woman in the photo, and Jeb didn't say either. The rhythm of the house remained the same. Work, fire, silence. But something had changed. Clara moved through the chores with steady hands, carrying hay, mending wire fences. Her borrowed flannel shirt was loose but still hugged her curves as she bent down. Jeb's eyes followed her now, not always looking away. She felt it a tug like a tide, but the darkness of the necklace kept her alert. Her past Amos's rejection, her stepfather's contempt whispers that she's not good enough. However, Jeb's quiet respect, his lack of demands, gradually eroded that doubt. One afternoon, under a sky heavy with snow about to fall, they repaired a collapsed barn post. Clara held the wooden stick steady. Her breath was hazy. Her cheeks were red from the cold. Her shirt fell down to reveal the curve of her neck, a drop of sweat despite the cold weather. Jeb's hammer stopped mid-swing, his eyes flickering over her skin before he could regain his composure. "You are strong," he said, his voice low. She looked into his eye. "It has to be." He nodded, and they continued working. But the air was filled with unspoken words. At dinner, their knees touched under the table. No one moved away. Clara's heart was pounding, not with fear, but with something new, desire mixed with trust. That night, the sound of a horseman's hooves broke the silence. Jeb grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch as Clara followed. Her heartbeat quickening. It was Cooper, the town deputy, his badge gleaming in the moonlight. "Harlond," he called. "That girl is causing trouble. Amos Beard says she owes him fair." His honor. Clara stepped forward, her chin held high. "I owe him nothing." Jeb's voice was hard. "She's staying. Tell Beard to stay away from her." Cooper hesitated, his eyes glancing at Clara's figure, then rode away. The threat hovers like smoke. Clara's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the bitterness of being treated as property. Jeb turned to her. "You are not his." She nodded, but fear gripped her. Would Amos come himself? Back inside, Jeb lit the fire. His movements tense, Clara observed, her voice soft. "Why are you standing up for me?" He paused, eyes on the fire. "Seen too many people left behind. Won't let it happen again." Her throat tightened. She stepped closer, her hand touching his arm. He didn't pull back. The fire crackled, but another sound, a low, distant rumble, interrupted. Jeb jerked his head up, rifle in hand once more. Clara's breath caught. Someone was out there, closer now, and the night felt alive with danger. Is it Amos, or is something worse coming to tear them apart? The night after the deputy's visit, the atmosphere in Jeb Harland's house was tense, like a bowstring pulled too tight. Clara moved lightly, washing the tin dishes, her hands steady, but her eyes glancing quickly at the door. The distant thump they heard was still in her mind. Boots, perhaps, or something heavier lurking on the hillside. Jeb sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, his broad hands methodical, but his jaw clenched, betraying the storm beneath his calm exterior. Clara's borrowed shirt was loose, but it still hugged her curves as she bent down to place a plate. The firelight caught the soft curve of her hips. Jeb's eyes glanced up for just a moment, then back to the rifle. The ghost of the necklace still hovered between them, unspoken, but the gravity of their close kiss kept the air alive with desire. Outside, the wind died down, leaving a silence too profound for comfort. Clara was drying her hands when Jeb's head jerked up, his hand tightening on the rifle. "Stay here," he said, his voice low, and stepped out onto the porch. The door creaked shut behind him. Clara's heart pounded. She knew that silence, the kind that held trouble. She grabbed a kitchen knife, its weight unfamiliar but sure in her calloused palm, and looked out the window. Shadows shifted outside the stable. Too deliberate for deer. Jeb's shadow moved toward the stable, limping but steady, rifle raised. Then a flash of light, a lantern swaying in the darkness, followed by the low murmur of voices, 2, perhaps 3 men. Clara's breath caught. She tucked the knife into her belt and pulled on Jeb's dust jacket, the weight of it steadying her. She stepped outside, defying his orders, her boots crunching on the frost. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she moved toward the cage, keeping low. Jeb's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and controlled. "Beard, you have no business being here." Amos Beard stepped into the lantern light, his shiny coat looking ridiculous among the rough pines. The 2 men hired to accompany him, their hands on their pistols. "She's mine, Harlond," Amos said, his voice smooth and possessive. "Paid her fairly." Clara's stomach clenched, but she stepped forward, her shadow falling beside Jeb. "I am no one's," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the night. Amos laughed, but his laugh was crisp. "Do you think this cripple can keep her?" Jeb's rifle didn't flinch, but his eyes glanced at Clara, a silent warning for her to stay back. She didn't. Her hand hovered near the knife, her body tense, her duster coat hanging slightly down, revealing the curve of her shoulders in the moonlight. One of Amos's men noticed, his eyes lingering too long, and Jeb stepped closer to her, protective, possessive without a word. "Get back, Jeb," he said to Amos, "or you won't get out of here riding." Amos smirked, but his men shifted uncomfortably. The tension crackled like dry wood. Then it exploded. One of the hired men drew his gun quickly, but Jeb was faster. A gunshot rang out. The man's pistol flew out of his hand. Blood spurted onto his sleeve. He staggered back, cursing. Amos's face paled, but he held his ground. His gun half drawn. Clara moved instinctively, stepping between Jeb and Amos, her knife glinting in the lantern light. "Enough," she said, her voice steady, though her chest trembled. Amos's eyes narrowed, glancing over her, but he saw the determination in her eyes. He spat on the ground. "This isn't over, Harlond." He mounted, his men following, their horses kicking up snow as they retreated into the darkness. Jeb lowered his rifle, his breathing heavy, his eyes still scanning the hillside. Clara's hand shook as she put the knife away, her body tingling with adrenaline and something deeper. Jeb's protectiveness, his refusal to let her be possessed. She turned to him, their eyes locked, the space between them filled with unspoken desire. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice low. He stepped closer, his hand touching her arm, warm despite the cold. "Yes, I had to." Words that carry weight, not just for tonight, but for all the nights he's been alone. They walked back to the house, shoulder to shoulder. But as they reached the porch, a soft rustle came from the trees, too close, too deliberate. Jeb's hand tightened on the rifle. Clara's heart pounded. Someone was still out there, watching, waiting. Who is coming for them now? And will the house still be a shelter when dawn breaks? Dawn breaks over Jeb Harland's farm, the first light flooding the frost-covered valley with gold. The rustling in the trees was nothing but a fox fleeing the coming day. But the tension of the night still lingered in Clara's tense shoulders as she stood on the porch. Jeb's dust jacket draped over her. Inside, Jeb set down his rifle, his limp heavier from the cold and the strain. Amos Beard's withdrawal feels like a pause, not an end. But Clara is no longer the woman who sat collapsed on the dry hollow platform. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused from pitchforks and wire. Her heart, once wounded by rejection, now beats steadily beside a man who sees her work. They don't talk about the necklace or the woman in it. Instead, Clara knelt by the stove, stirring the embers, her patched dress hugging her curves, no longer hidden in shame. Jeb watched, his blue-gray eyes softer now, the scowl he once wore replaced by a quiet peace. He walked over to her, kneeling down despite his injured leg, and placed a small box in her hand. Inside, a simple silver ring sparkled. No frills, just the truth. "This is yours," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "If you stay." Her eyes stung, but she slipped the ring on, her finger brushing his. "I stayed," she whispered. A few weeks later, the first green shoots of spring crept across the hills. Clara's belly ached with the first signs of life, a secret she shared with Jeb one evening. As they leaned against the porch railing, his arm around her waist, he pulled her closer, his beard brushing against her temple. No need for words. The small house is no longer a shelter for one person. It contained 2 cups on the shelves, her dress next to his coat, their boots by the fire. Amos's shadow faded. The whispers of Dry Hollow did not reach here. Clara's curves, once despised, now fill this house with pride. Jeb's scars, once a wall, now depict a man who chose to live again. As the sun set, staining the sky with embers, they stood side by side, hands clasped, the ring catching the last light. This harsh and unforgiving valley became their salvation, a place where worth was not measured by the looks of others, but by the silent vows they kept.